The wine tasted of iron and ash. Blake Cole set the crystal glass down on the marble mantelpiece, his pale fingers lingering on the rim as candlelight flickered across the empty ballroom. Snow pressed against the tall windows like ghostly hands, and the grandfather clock in the corner ticked toward midnight. Christmas Eve. 10 years to the day since Celeste had died in his arms, her blood pooling on these same marble floors. The mansion felt hollow around him. Every room a mausoleum of memories he couldn't escape. The scent of pine from the untouched Christmas tree in the corner mixed with the lingering smell of old leather and dust. He'd stopped celebrating, stopped pretending, stopped living the moment they'd taken her from him. The hunters had made sure of that. A sharp knock echoed through the silence. Blake's head lifted, his enhanced hearing catching the rapid heartbeat beyond the oak doors. 2 heartbeats, 1 adult, 1 child. No one had crossed his threshold in a decade. His hand moved instinctively toward the silver blade concealed beneath his black coat. Muscle memory from centuries of survival kicking in, even as his mind struggled to process the impossibility. Another knock, more desperate this time. A woman's voice, breathless and afraid. "Please, I know you're in there. I have something that belongs to you." Blake crossed the ballroom in 3 silent strides, his boots making no sound on the marble. Through the peephole, he saw her, a young woman with dark hair plastered to her skull by melting snow, her arms wrapped around a girl who couldn't be more than 7. Both were shivering, their breath forming clouds in the bitter air. The woman's eyes darted over her shoulder as if expecting pursuit. "I don't know you," Blake said through the door, his voice rusty from disuse. "My name is Mara Chen. This is my daughter Laya." The woman's voice cracked. "I have a letter. It's written in Celeste's handwriting." The words hit Blake like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, his hand clutching the door frame. Celeste's handwriting. Impossible. She'd been dead for 10 years, her body burned to ash by the same hunters who destroyed everything he'd ever loved. "That's not possible," he whispered. "Please." Tears were streaming down the woman's face now. "They're coming for us. The hunters. They killed my mother 3 days ago, and they won't stop until they have Leia. My mother told me to find you, to bring you this letter. She said you were the only one who could protect us." Blake's hand hovered over the deadbolt. Every instinct screamed danger. He'd survived this long by trusting no one, by keeping the world locked outside these walls. But the desperation in the woman's voice, the way she spoke Celeste's name like a prayer, it shattered something inside his chest. He opened the door. The cold air hit him like a slap, carrying with it the scent of fear and something else. Something familiar. The woman, Mara, looked up at him with eyes wide with relief and terror. But it was the child in her arms that stopped Blake's breath entirely. The girl had Celeste's eyes. Not similar. Identical. The same impossible shade of violet that had haunted his dreams for 10 years. The same ethereal quality that had marked his wife as something more than human. The child stared at him with those ancient eyes, and Blake felt the carefully constructed walls around his heart begin to crumble. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "Quickly." Mara hurried past him, clutching Leia close. Blake sealed the door behind them, engaging every lock, every ward, every protection spell he'd woven into the mansion's bones. Only then did he turn to face his unexpected guests. They stood in the center of his foyer like refugees from a nightmare, dripping melted snow onto the Persian rug. Mara's clothes were torn, and Blake could smell dried blood beneath the layers of fabric. Fresh scratches marked her neck. Hunter's claws. She'd been running hard and running long. "The letter," Blake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mara reached into her coat with shaking hands and withdrew a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Blake's name was written across the front in elegant script that made his dead heart clench. He'd know that handwriting anywhere. The careful loops, the way she dotted her eyes with tiny hearts. It was Celeste's hand, no question. But that was impossible. Celeste had been dead for 10 years. Blake took the letter with fingers that trembled. The paper felt warm against his skin, as if it had been waiting all this time to find its way to him. The wax seal bore the mark of the old bloodlines, the symbol Celeste had worn on a chain around her neck. His wife's ring. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "My mother," Mara said. "Elena Chen. She was Celeste's protector before the massacre. She saved this letter, kept it hidden until her death. The hunters found her 3 days ago. With her last breath, she told me to bring it to you." The name Elena Chen stirred something in Blake's memory. Celeste had spoken of her protectors, the humans who carried the old blood, who served as guardians to the vampire nobility. But Elena had vanished the night of the massacre, presumed dead with all the rest. Blake's thumb traced the wax seal. Breaking it felt like descending into a grave, but he had to know. Had to understand how his dead wife could reach across 10 years of silence to save a stranger and her child. The seal cracked under the pressure. Inside, 2 sheets of paper, both in Celeste's careful script. Blake unfolded them with the reverence of a man handling holy relics. "My beloved Blake, if you are reading this letter, then I am gone, and the prophecy has begun to unfold. I know you will blame yourself. You will retreat into darkness and despair. But you must listen to me now, as you have never listened before. The child who bears this letter carries our salvation in her blood. She is the key to breaking the curse that has bound our kind for centuries. Elena's bloodline has guarded this secret for generations, waiting for the right moment, the right child. Laya is that child. The hunters who killed me were not acting alone. They were sent by someone within our own court. Someone who fears what Laya represents. Protect her, Blake. She is our hope for redemption. I have seen what comes after. Light, my darling. Light after so much darkness. With all my love. Celeste. Blake read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated. A prophecy. A child with the power to break the vampire curse. Betrayal from within their own court. And Celeste, somehow knowing it all before her death. He looked up to find Mara watching him with desperate hope, while little Laya had wandered toward the Christmas tree, her violet eyes reflecting the candlelight like jewels. The child moved with an otherworldly grace that reminded Blake painfully of his wife. "She has Celeste's eyes," he said. Mara nodded. "My mother said the old blood runs strong in our family, that we were chosen to guard the secret until the time was right. And you believe that time is now? The hunters are hunting us specifically, not just any vampires or their allies. Us. They killed my mother to get to Laya. They'll never stop." Mara's voice broke. "I have nowhere else to go. No one else to turn to. Please." Blake folded the letter carefully, his mind racing. If Celeste was right, if this child truly carried the key to breaking the curse that condemned vampires to an existence of darkness and blood, then everything changed. His self-imposed exile, his decade of mourning, all of it became meaningless in the face of this possibility. But more than that, looking at Laya was like seeing Celeste again. Not reincarnated, but connected somehow. The same otherworldly presence, the same sense of ancient wisdom trapped in mortal flesh. "Who sent the hunters?" Blake asked. "I don't know," Mara said. "My mother died before she could tell me everything. But she said to trust no one from the old court. She said the betrayal came from within." Blake's jaw clenched. The old court. The vampire nobility who had once called him king, who had bowed and scraped and sworn eternal loyalty right up until the moment they'd sold him and Celeste to the hunters. He'd suspected treachery for 10 years but had never had proof. A sound reached his enhanced hearing, the distant rumble of engines on the mountain road leading to his estate. Multiple vehicles, moving fast. His blood ran cold. "How did you get here?" he asked sharply. "We stole a car," Mara said, "but it broke down about 5 miles from here. We walked the rest of the way. Did you see anyone following you? Mara's face went white. No, we were careful. I thought we were careful. The engine sounds grew louder. Blake moved to the window and peered through a crack in the curtains. Headlights carved through the falling snow, at least 3 vehicles climbing the winding road toward his mansion. They'd found her trail, followed it straight to his door. They're here, he said. Mara grabbed Laya, pulling the child close. What do we do? Blake's mind calculated distances, escape routes, defensive positions. His mansion was a fortress, but it was designed to keep out casual intruders, not a determined team of vampire hunters armed with modern weapons and ancient knowledge. There's a safe room in the basement, he said. Stone walls, blessed silver inlay, multiple exit tunnels. You'll be protected there. What about you? Blake looked at the letter in his hands, then at the child with Celeste's eyes. For 10 years he'd hidden from the world, wallowing in grief and guilt. But Celeste hadn't died in vain. She'd died protecting a secret, a hope, a future he'd never imagined possible. The sound of car doors slamming echoed across the snow-covered grounds. Boots crunched on gravel. They had minutes, maybe less. I'm going to do what I should have done 10 years ago, Blake said, his voice hardening with resolve. I'm going to... The front windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and gunfire. Blake threw himself over Mara and Laya, shielding them as bullets tore through the air where they'd been standing. The hunters weren't wasting time with negotiations. The basement! Blake shouted over the gunfire. Now! He half-carried, half-dragged them toward the hidden door behind the staircase as the assault intensified. The hunters had come prepared for war, and they weren't planning to leave any witnesses. As they reached the concealed entrance to the safe room, Blake caught a glimpse of movement through the shattered windows. Men in tactical gear, moving with military precision. But there was something else in their movements, something that made his blood freeze in his veins. They moved too fast, too fluid. These weren't just human hunters. These were vampires, hunting vampires. The betrayal ran deeper than he'd ever imagined, and now he understood why Celeste had hidden the truth in her letter. The enemy wasn't just human bigotry or ancient superstition. The enemy was his own kind. Blake slammed the safe room door behind Mara and Laya, sealing them in the blessed sanctuary below. But as he turned to face the intruders pouring through his broken windows, one terrible thought echoed in his mind. If vampires were hunting the child with Celeste's eyes, then the conspiracy that had killed his wife was still alive, still active, still... The gunshot that had shattered Blake's windows still echoed in his enhanced hearing as he pressed his back against the safe room door. The blessed silver inlay burned through his shirt, a reminder that sanctuary came with a price. Above him, boots thundered across marble floors and voices called out, in the clinical tones of trained killers. Clear the ballroom, check every shadow. No sign of them on the main floor. They're here. The thermal shows 3 heat signatures, basement level. Blake's jaw clenched. Thermal imaging. These weren't desperate hunters stumbling through the dark. They were professionals with military-grade equipment. And the way they moved, the speed of their coordination, confirmed his worst fear. Vampire hunters led by vampires themselves. He could hear Mara's ragged breathing through the reinforced door, little Laya's whispered questions. The child's voice carried that same musical quality that had made Celeste's laughter sound like silver bells. It cut through his chest like a blade. Blake? Mara's voice was barely audible. What's happening up there? Stay quiet, he whispered back. Don't come out no matter what you hear. The footsteps above grew more systematic, methodical. They were searching room by room, and it wouldn't take them long to find the hidden entrance. Blake's fingers found the concealed weapons cache built into the wall. Silver-edged blades, holy water, wooden stakes that would kill him as surely as any other vampire. He'd prepared for this day, but he'd always imagined facing human hunters, not his own kind. A new sound reached his ears. The scrape of claws on marble. Something was wrong with that sound, though. Too deep, too deliberate. These weren't the desperate scratches of a cornered animal. They were being carved into his floor. A message. Blake crept up the basement stairs, each step silent as death. Through a crack in the door, he could see into his ravaged foyer. Glass littered the Persian rug like fallen stars, and snow drifted through the broken windows. But it was the figure standing in the center of the destruction that made his blood turn to ice. Marcus Valdez, Blake's former lieutenant, his most trusted advisor. The vampire who had stood at Celeste's funeral and wept tears of silver. He was dressed in tactical black now, silver weapons gleaming at his belt. But his face was exactly as Blake remembered. Aristocratic, cold, beautiful in the way that only centuries of vampiric perfection could create. "Hello, old friend," Marcus called out, his voice carrying easily through the mansion. "I know you're listening. I can smell your fear." Blake's hand tightened on the silver blade. Fear. Yes, he was afraid, but not for himself. Afraid for the child with Celeste's eyes. Afraid that history was about to repeat itself in the worst possible way. 10 years of hiding, Marcus continued, stepping delicately over the broken glass. 10 years of mourning your precious queen. Did you really think we wouldn't find you eventually? We? Blake whispered to himself. How many of his former allies had turned traitor? As if summoned by his thoughts, 2 more figures emerged from the shadows of his ballroom. Elena Voss, her platinum hair gleaming in the candlelight, silver chains wrapped around her wrists like jewelry. And behind her, the mountain of a vampire Blake had once called brother, Stefan Kozlov, his scarred face impassive as stone. Blake's entire inner circle. The 3 vampires he'd trusted most in all the world, standing in his home like conquerors surveying their prize. "The thermal imaging shows them in the basement," Elena said, her voice honey-sweet and poisonous. "Shall I retrieve them?" "No need to rush," Marcus replied. "Blake will come to us. He always was predictable that way. Too noble for his own good." Stefan's laugh was like grinding granite. "Noble. Is that what you call abandoning your people for a decade? Hiding while the old bloodlines crumbled?" The words hit Blake like physical blows. He'd told himself he was grieving, recovering, planning. But the truth was simpler and more damning. He'd been hiding, running from responsibility, from leadership, from the very real possibility that he'd failed everyone who'd ever counted on him. "The child has the old blood," Marcus continued, and Blake could hear the hunger in his voice. "Elena's bloodline, the one Celeste died protecting. Do you have any idea what that blood can do, Blake? What power it carries?" Through the crack in the door, Blake watched Marcus run his finger along the marble mantelpiece where Blake's wineglass still sat. The vampire's expression was reverent, almost religious. "She can break the curse," Marcus whispered. "End the endless night. Free us from the hunger that drives us to kill. Your precious Celeste died for that secret, and now it's walked right into our hands." Blake's grip on the blade tightened until silver began to cut into his palm. They weren't here to destroy the child. They were here to use her. "The process will kill her, of course," Elena added casually. "The old blood must be drained completely to work the ritual. But think of what we could become, Marcus. What our kind could become. No more hiding in shadows, no more depending on human cattle. We could walk in daylight again. Little Laya would die. The child with Celeste's eyes would be murdered for her blood, just as Blake's wife had been murdered for the secret she'd protected. History repeating itself with mathematical precision. "Blake!" Marcus's voice turned sharp, commanding. "I know you can hear me. Come out and let's discuss this like civilized creatures. The child doesn't have to suffer. We can make it quick, painless, a small sacrifice for the greater good of our people." The greater good. Blake had heard those words before, 10 years ago, when these same 3 vampires had convinced him to attend the Peace Summit, where Celeste had walked into a trap. For the greater good of vampire-human relations, they'd said. For the future of their kind. He'd been such a fool. A new sound made Blake freeze, the soft whisper of the safe room door opening behind him. He spun around to see Mara emerging. From the blessed sanctuary, Leia in her arms. The woman's face was pale but determined, her jaw set with grim resolution. "No," Blake hissed. "Get back inside." "They're not going to stop," Mara whispered. "I heard what they said. About the blood. About killing her. They'll tear this place apart to get to us." She was right, of course. The safe room was a temporary measure at best. Given enough time, his former allies would find a way through any defense he'd constructed. They had forever to work with. And Blake was only one vampire against 3. "There's another way out," Blake said quietly. "The tunnel system leads to the old wine cellars, then to a cave system in the mountain. We can run forever," Mara interrupted. "And they'll keep following. My mother ran for my entire life, Blake. She died running. I won't let Leia live that way." Above them, Marcus's voice had taken on an edge of impatience. "Blake, you're trying my patience. The child's mother is mortal. She'll freeze to death in that basement long before we give up. Is that really how you want this to end?" Blake looked at little Leia, who was watching him with those impossible violet eyes. She seemed impossibly calm for a 7-year-old girl hiding from monsters. There was something ancient in her gaze, something that reminded him painfully of Celeste's final moments. "She's not afraid," he realized aloud. Mara followed his gaze to her daughter. "She hasn't been afraid since we left home. It's like she knows something we don't." Leia reached out then, her small hand touching Blake's cheek. Her skin was warm, almost fevered, and where she touched him, Blake felt something he hadn't experienced in a decade. Not just hope, but certainty. Purpose. "They're wrong about the blood," Leia said, her voice carrying despite its whisper. "It's not about dying. It's about choosing." The words hit Blake like a revelation. Celeste's letter hadn't mentioned a ritual requiring the child's death. It had spoken of breaking a curse, of salvation, of light after darkness. But his former allies had twisted that truth into something monstrous, just as they'd twisted his grief into exile and his love into weakness. "What choice?" Blake asked. But before Leia could answer, the sound of splintering wood echoed through the mansion. They'd found the hidden door. "Time's up, Blake," Marcus called out. "We're coming down." Blake made his decision in that instant. Not the noble choice or the strategic choice, but the only choice that mattered. He would not let history repeat itself. He would not lose another innocent to the ambitions of monsters wearing familiar faces. "The wine cellar," he said to Mara. "There's a passage behind the old vintages. Follow it to the end, then take the left tunnel. It leads to a checkpoint cabin 5 miles down the mountain. There's a phone there. Supplies. Call the number written on the back of Celeste's letter." "What about you?" Blake smiled, and for the first time in 10 years it felt genuine. "I'm going to do what I should have done 10 years ago. I'm going to stop running." He pressed a silver key into Mara's hand. "This opens a safe deposit box in Geneva, Bank of the Old Families. Everything you need to understand Leia's gift is in there, along with enough money to disappear completely if that's what you choose. Blake, go. Now." The sound of boots on basement stairs was getting closer. Blake waited until he heard the whisper of the wine cellar door closing behind Mara and Leia. Then he stepped into the corridor to face his past. Marcus stood at the bottom of the stairs, flanked by Elena and Stefan. All 3 had weapons drawn, silver blades that gleamed with deadly promise. But it was the expression on Marcus's face that told Blake everything he needed to know. Not surprise or relief at finding his old king. Disappointment. "You were supposed to be better than this," Marcus said. "The great Blake Cole, reduced to hiding behind a human woman and her child." "The great Marcus Valdez," Blake replied. "Reduced to murdering children for dark magic." "Evolution," Elena corrected. "The old ways are dying, Blake. Hiding in shadows, feeding on criminals and outcasts, pretending we're not the apex predators we were born to be. The child's blood offers us a chance to become what we were meant to be. Gods? Blake asked. Or just better monsters? Stefan stepped forward, his massive frame blocking most of the corridor. You've lost your vision, old friend. Your grief has made you weak. Has it? Blake asked. He thought of Laya's words, of the certainty in her ancient eyes, of Celeste's letter promising light after darkness. Or has it finally shown me what strength actually looks like? He could feel it then, the change that had been building since the moment he'd opened his door to desperate strangers. 10 years of guilt and isolation burning away like morning mist, replaced by something harder and cleaner. Purpose. Marcus must have seen it in his eyes, because the younger vampire's expression shifted from disappointment to wariness. Blake, don't make this harder than it has to be. It's already as hard as it has to be, Blake replied. You killed my wife. You drove me into exile. And now you want to murder an innocent child for power you don't understand and don't deserve. We didn't kill Celeste, Elena protested. The hunters? Hunters you led to her, Blake interrupted. Hunters you paid in silver and secrets. Did you think I wouldn't figure it out eventually? The silence that followed was answer enough. Blake saw the truth in their faces. Guilt, defiance, and underneath it all, the desperate hunger that had driven them to betray everything they'd once sworn to protect. The old ways are ending, Blake, Marcus said finally, with or without you. The child's blood will free our people from centuries of darkness. By murdering her. By using her. As she was meant to be used. Blake's laugh was bitter as winter wind. Meant to be used. Is that what you told yourselves when you sold Celeste to the hunters? That she was meant to die for your greater good? Stefan's patience finally snapped. The massive vampire lunged forward, silver blade flashing in the dim light. But Blake had been expecting it. 10 years of isolation hadn't made him weak. It had made him focused. He sidestepped the attack, his own blade finding the gap between Stefan's ribs with surgical precision. The big vampire stumbled, silver burning through his undead flesh like acid. But before Blake could press his advantage, Elena was on him, chains whipping through the air like metal serpents. One wrapped around his wrist, the silver links searing his skin. But Blake used her momentum against her, spinning inside her guard and driving his elbow into her throat. Marcus watched it all with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. Still fast, he observed, but not fast enough. The silver blade took Blake in the shoulder, punching through muscle and scraping against bone. Pain exploded through his nervous system, but he managed to grab Marcus's wrist, preventing the blade from finding his heart. They struggled in the narrow corridor, vampire strength against vampire strength, silver weapons casting wild shadows on the stone walls. Blake could smell his own blood, hear Stefan and Elena recovering behind him, 3 against 1. The same odds Celeste had faced the night she died. But this time would be different. Blake released Marcus's wrist and threw himself backward, slamming all 3 of them into the stone wall. The impact shook dust from the ceiling and sent cracked spider-webbing through the ancient mortar. In the confusion, Blake managed to tear free of Elena's chains and put some distance between himself and his attackers. Enough, Marcus snarled. Where are they, Blake? Where are the woman and child? Blake smiled, tasting blood on his lips. Gone. By now they're miles away, and you'll never find them. It wasn't entirely true. He could still hear Mara and Laya moving through the wine cellar passages, their heartbeats echoing faintly through the mansion stones. But it would be true soon enough, and the lie bought them precious minutes. We'll see, Marcus said. He nodded to Elena and Stefan. Search every tunnel, every passage. They can't have gotten far. As his former allies spread out through the basement, Blake pressed his back against the cold stone wall and tried to think. The shoulder wound was healing, but slowly. Silver poisoning slowed their regenerative abilities. He needed time, space, and a better plan than trading his life for a few extra minutes of escape time. But as he listened to the sound of Mara and Laya moving deeper into the mountain, Blake realized something that changed everything. The sound of their footsteps was wrong. Too heavy. Too deliberate. They weren't running anymore. They were coming back. And as the realization hit him, little Laya's voice echoed through the stone corridors, clear and unafraid. It's not about dying. It's about choosing. And I choose to stop running. The child with Celeste's eyes was walking straight back into the heart of danger, and Blake knew with terrible certainty that everything, his exile, his grief, his decade of hiding, had been leading to this moment. The real battle was about to begin. Blake heard the soft footsteps before he saw them. Mara emerged from the wine cellar passage first, her face set with grim determination, but it was Laya who commanded attention. The 7-year-old walked with the measured pace of someone far older, her violet eyes luminous in the basement's dim light. She moved like she was walking toward destiny rather than death. "No," Blake whispered, but his protest died in his throat as he met the child's ancient gaze. Marcus turned at the sound, his silver blade still dripping with Blake's blood. The smile that spread across his aristocratic features was cold as winter moonlight. "How convenient. The little lamb comes to slaughter." "I'm not a lamb," Laya said simply. Her small hand found Blake's, and where she touched him, warmth spread through his undead flesh like liquid sunlight. "And you're not the wolves you pretend to be." Elena laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Listen to her. The child thinks she understands power." "I understand choice," Laya replied. She looked directly at Marcus, unflinching despite the naked hunger in his eyes. "My bloodline doesn't break curses by dying, it breaks them by choosing to live differently." Stefan hefted his silver blade, impatience radiating from his massive frame. "Enough philosophy. The ritual requires her blood, not her words." But Marcus held up a hand, genuine curiosity flickering in his ancient eyes. "Let her speak. I want to understand what Celeste died protecting." Blake felt the change then, a subtle shift in the air pressure that made his enhanced senses sing with warning. The basement was growing warmer despite the broken windows above, and the shadows seemed less oppressive. Whatever power flowed in Laya's veins, it was waking up. "The curse isn't hunger," Laya said, her voice carrying despite its youth. "The curse is forgetting what we were before the hunger. Before the darkness. Before we chose to become monsters." "We didn't choose," Elena began. "You chose," Laya interrupted, and for a moment her voice carried harmonics that reminded Blake painfully of Celeste. "Every day, every victim, every betrayal, you chose to let the darkness win." Marcus's grip tightened on his weapon. "And you think your blood can wash away centuries of sin? Make us human again?" "I think my blood can show you what you really are," Laya said. "But only if you're brave enough to look." The air in the basement began to shimmer, heat distortion rising from the stone floor. Blake could smell something impossible: sunrise, morning dew, flowers blooming in defiance of winter. The blessed silver inlays in the walls began to glow with soft radiance, casting everything in warm light. Elena hissed, shielding her eyes. "What is this?" "Truth," Mara said quietly. She was watching her daughter with a mixture of pride and terror, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "This is what my mother died protecting. Not a ritual, not a sacrifice. A choice." The light grew stronger, and Blake saw his former allies clearly for the first time in decades. Beneath their perfect vampire features, beneath the cold beauty that centuries had carved into their faces, he could see what they had been. Marcus with laugh lines around his eyes, back when he'd been capable of joy. Elena with freckles across her nose, remnants of the farm girl she'd been before the turning. Stefan with gentle hands, before he'd learned to kill with them. "No," Stefan growled, but his voice cracked like a teenager's. This isn't real. It's the only real thing left, Blake said, understanding flooding through him. He looked at Laia, seeing not just Celeste's eyes but her gift, the ability to show others their true selves, to burn away the lies they told themselves about necessity and survival, and the greater good. Marcus raised his blade, but his hand was trembling. Stop this. Stop it now. I can't, Laia said simply. You have to choose to stop seeing, and you're not brave enough. The light reached its peak, and Blake felt something shift inside his chest. The cold weight he'd carried for 10 years, grief, guilt, the crushing certainty that he'd failed everyone who mattered, began to crack like ice in spring. Beneath it, he found something he thought he'd lost forever. Hope. The blood doesn't change us, he said, the words coming from some deep place of understanding. It shows us we can change ourselves. Marcus lunged then, desperation overriding tactical thinking. His silver blade swept toward Laia's throat in a killing stroke that would end the light, end the choice, end everything that threatened his comfortable darkness. Blake moved without thinking, vampire speed carrying him between the blade and the child. Silver punched through his chest, missing his heart by inches, and pain exploded through every nerve. But he caught Marcus's wrist and held it firm, preventing the killing blow. You want her blood? Blake asked, his voice steady despite the silver burning in his chest. Then you go through me first. For a moment they stood frozen, predator and predator locked in deadly embrace. Blake could see the war in Marcus's eyes, hunger fighting against memory, darkness battling the growing light that showed him what he'd become. Please, Marcus whispered, and Blake realized his old friend was crying, silver tears that caught the impossible, sunrise light. Please don't make me be human again. I can't carry what I've done. You don't have to carry it alone, Blake said gently. That's what family means. The blade fell from Marcus's nerveless fingers, clattering against the stone floor. The vampire who had been Blake's most trusted advisor, who had stood at Celeste's funeral and wept, who had spent 10 years convincing himself that betrayal was necessity, collapsed to his knees. Elena and Stefan stood motionless, weapons forgotten, staring at the light emanating from little Laia as if seeing the sun for the first time in centuries. The chains around Elena's wrists had fallen away, and Stefan's scarred hands were pressed against his face, shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. What happens now? Marcus asked, his voice broken. Blake looked at Laia, whose violet eyes held infinite compassion. Now we choose what comes next. The child stepped forward and placed her small hand on Marcus's silver hair. Where she touched him, the cold perfection of his vampire features softened, became more human, more real. The curse breaks when you stop choosing to be cursed. The hunger will always be there, Laia said simply, but you can choose what to do with it. You can choose to help instead of hurt, to protect instead of prey, to love instead of take. Marcus looked up at Blake, centuries of friendship and betrayal and forgiveness hanging between them. Can you ever trust me again? Blake helped his old friend to his feet, ignoring the silver wound that was slowly healing in his chest. I can choose to try. Around them, the impossible light began to fade, but the warmth remained. The basement felt different now. Not a tomb of past failures, but a foundation for something new. Elena and Stefan were helping each other stand, their weapons abandoned on the floor, their faces marked by tears and wonder. What about the others? Elena asked. The old bloodlines, the vampire houses? They won't understand this. Then we'll teach them, Blake said. He felt Celeste's presence then, not as a ghost, but as a promise kept. One choice at a time. Mara stepped forward, her arm around Laia's shoulders. My daughter can't save everyone, but maybe she can show them that salvation is possible. If they're brave enough to choose it, Laia added. Blake nodded, feeling the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders again, But this time, it felt different. Not a burden, but a purpose. He thought of his mansion above them, broken windows letting in the winter air. It would need repairs, but it would also need to become something new. Not a fortress against the world, but a lighthouse for those lost in darkness. The old families will come, Stefan said, practical as always, even in transformation. When word spreads about what happened here, they'll want to see for themselves. Let them come, Blake said. He looked at Laia, who smiled up at him with Celeste's eyes and her own ancient wisdom. We'll be ready. As they made their way up from the basement, Blake caught a glimpse of the Christmas tree still standing in his ballroom, somehow untouched by the violence. Its lights twinkled in the pre-dawn darkness, and he realized that for the first time in 10 years, he was looking forward to Christmas morning. Not because the past had been erased or the future was certain, but because he had finally learned the difference between surviving and living, between carrying guilt and carrying hope. And as Leia slipped her small hand into his, Blake Cole, former vampire king, exile guardian, chose to believe in second chances. The eternal night was ending, one choice at a time.